Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow as he stepped into the crowded street market of New Mesa. The sky above was a dull green, tinted by the planet's thin atmosphere, and the air smelled of roasted meats, alien spices, and something metallic that reminded him of the shipyard back home. He had come to the market for a simple task: buy meat for his family before the winter storms arrived. But as soon as he entered, he realized this market was no ordinary place. Traders from across the galaxy had set up stalls, selling foods, trinkets, and tools from worlds he had only heard of. The chatter of many languages mixed together, creating a chaotic symphony of life. Daniel navigated the narrow aisles, ducking under colorful banners that flapped in the warm breeze. There were aliens with long, flexible limbs, glowing eyes, and voices like music. There were humans too, settlers like him, hawking what little they had managed to grow in this harsh land. He finally spotted the stall he had come for. A tall, thin alien with scales instead of skin was slicing cuts of meat with precision, placing them neatly on trays. The smell made Daniel's stomach growl. "Good cuts today," the vendor said in a harsh, clipped voice. "Best meat in the sector. Fresh from the grazing fields on Zorath 9. Daniel nodded. He was about to reach for his credits when a sudden movement at the edge of his vision caught his attention. A small group of human-like figures stood quietly near the market entrance. They were dressed in worn garments resembling Apache clothing from Earth, with intricate patterns stitched along the edges. Their faces were weathered, their eyes wary, and a small sign leaned against one of the stalls reading in English and an alien dialect. "Widows seeking work." Daniel frowned. He had seen signs like this before, but never here in this market. One woman in particular stood out. She was tall, strong, and moved with quiet dignity. Her dark hair was braided loosely, and her eyes held a depth of experience that immediately drew him in. He had learned over the years that the settlers of New Mesa often included widows, orphans, and wanderers who had survived tragedies that would break ordinary people. This woman radiated strength even in her grief. Curiosity piqued, Daniel approached her. "Hello," he said carefully. "Are you looking for work?" The woman's eyes narrowed slightly and she studied him. "Yes," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "I am Mika. I lost my husband during the raids on the northern settlements. I work to survive and I seek a safe place to continue." Daniel nodded slowly. He wanted to understand her story, but the market was loud, and he could barely hear over the din. He glanced back at the meat stall, then back at Mika. In a moment of absent-minded pragmatism, he assumed that buying someone in this market meant hiring their services. After all, the planet was dangerous and he needed help with his homestead. He pulled out his credit chip and approached the vendor. "I'll take her," he said quickly, pointing at Mika. The vendor raised a scale-like eyebrow and chuckled. "You mean, you want to hire the widow, or?" Daniel paused. I just need help at my home. Protection, hunting, cooking, whatever she can do. I'll pay fairly." The vendor's lips curled into a thin smile. "Fair enough. Payment first. You'll have her for one standard term, no refunds." Daniel transferred the credits quickly, feeling a little embarrassed by the awkwardness of the transaction. Mika looked shocked. "You bought me?" she asked, her voice a mixture of anger and disbelief. No, not bought," Daniel stammered. "I mean, yes, but I just need help. I didn't mean to offend you. I thought this is how it works here." Mika crossed her arms, glaring at him. The market around them seemed to blur as the chaos continued. But for a moment it felt as if the entire world had narrowed to this strange misunderstanding. "You think a person is merchandise?" she asked quietly, though the words cut sharper than any blade. Daniel's face burned. I made a mistake. Please, let me explain." Reluctantly, Mika nodded. They moved a few steps away from the crowd, finding a quiet corner near a stall that sold alien textiles. Daniel began explaining his life, his family, and the harsh conditions of the settlement where he lived. He described his need for help, the isolation of the homestead, and how dangerous the planet could be in winter. Mika listened silently, her expression unreadable. She had encountered humans before, some kind and some cruel, but rarely had she met one so genuinely bewildered by his own ignorance. Slowly, she began to understand that Daniel's mistake was not malicious. "Very well," she said at last, her voice softening slightly. "I will come with you. But understand this, I am not property. I'm a survivor, and I will leave if I feel threatened or unwelcome. Daniel nodded earnestly. I understand. I promise, I need someone I can trust, and I think you might be the only one who can help me survive this winter. With the agreement settled, they began the journey back to Daniel's homestead. The market seemed different now. The alien vendors continued their calls. The humans went about their business, and yet Daniel felt a strange sense of relief. He had accidentally stumbled into something extraordinary. The walk to his homestead was not easy. The streets were crowded, and the wind picked up, carrying dust and debris from the outskirts of the city. They had to dodge carts, alien creatures, and the occasional scuffle between settlers and rogue traders. Mika's presence was reassuring. She moved with a careful grace, her eyes scanning the surroundings, anticipating danger before it happened. Daniel realized quickly that her skills went beyond simple survival. She had a keen understanding of the terrain, the behavior of locals, and the subtle signs of trouble. At one point, a group of petty thieves attempted to block their path, seeing Daniel as an easy target. Mika stepped forward calmly, her voice firm and commanding. Move aside. You will not touch him. The thieves hesitated, clearly not expecting resistance. Mika's stance and the quiet confidence in her eyes convinced them to back off. Daniel stood frozen for a moment, amazed. I didn't even know you could do that, he whispered. Mika glanced at him, a hint of a smile on her lips. Experience teaches you. You learn to survive by being ready for anything. By the time they reached Daniel's homestead, the sun was dipping below the horizon. The small settlement was quiet, the homes clustered together with a mix of human and alien architecture. Daniel's house was modest, a single-level structure made of reinforced metal and local stone, surrounded by a small fenced area where he kept livestock and crops. Daniel introduced Mika to his family, who eyed her with curiosity. His teenage daughter, Lila, was the first to approach, cautiously examining Mika. Are you really going to stay with us? She asked. Mika nodded politely. For now, I am here to help. Dinner that evening was simple. Daniel and Mika worked together to prepare the food, sharing tasks and slowly finding a rhythm. The conversation was awkward at first, but gradually it became easier. Daniel asked about her past, and she told him stories of her life before the raids, of her husband, and of the lessons she had learned from her people. She spoke of survival, of respect for the land, and of the strength found in facing loss with dignity. Daniel shared his own struggles, building a life on a frontier planet, facing storms, wild creatures, and the constant threat of raiders. Mika listened carefully, nodding. You have done well to survive, she said, but you do not have to do it alone. That night, as Daniel lay in bed, he reflected on the strange turn of events. What had begun as a simple trip to buy meat had turned into a life-altering encounter. He realized that Mika was more than just help. She was someone who could teach him, challenge him, and perhaps even change his understanding of human resilience in this harsh galaxy. Meanwhile, Mika sat outside under the pale green sky, looking at the stars that barely shone through the atmosphere. She had been wary of humans for so long, always expecting betrayal or cruelty. But Daniel was different, genuine, honest, and flawed in a way that made her want to see him survive. She did not yet trust fully, but she could sense the possibility of something new, something worth staying for. The wind picked up, carrying the distant sound of the market, the faint calls of alien wildlife, and the echo of life continuing, unstoppable and unpredictable. Daniel and Mika were bound together not by ownership, but by circumstance and necessity, and perhaps by the beginning of mutual respect. The first part of their story ended with uncertainty, but also with hope. Daniel had come to the market expecting only meat, but he had found something far more valuable: a companion, a guide, and a reminder of the strength of the human spirit, even on the edges of the galaxy. Winter had settled over the frontier settlement of New Mesa. The pale green sky, streaked with distant storms, reminded everyone that survival was no easy task on this planet. Daniel's homestead, small but sturdy, now had a new presence: Mika. Though the first few days had been tense, both had begun to adjust to one another, discovering strengths and skills they had never expected to find in a companion. Mika had quickly familiarized herself with Daniel's routines. She inspected the small livestock pens, checking fences for weaknesses. She examined the storage of food and supplies, suggesting improvements to make the homestead more secure. Daniel watched her with admiration, silently realizing that her knowledge went far beyond simple survival. She had the sharp instincts of someone who had lived through loss and hardship, tempered by intelligence and careful observation. One morning, Daniel woke to the sound of Mika's voice calling from the livestock pens. "The fences are loose on the eastern side. If the winds get worse, the animals might escape," she warned. Daniel rubbed his eyes and followed her outside. The frost had already begun forming on the ground, making the air crisp and sharp. He nodded, realizing how much he had underestimated her. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I wouldn't have noticed until it was too late." Mika gave a small, knowing smile. "You focus on survival, but survival requires more than effort. It requires foresight." The days passed in a rhythm of work and learning. Mika taught Daniel techniques for preserving alien meats, using herbs and spices he had never seen before. She demonstrated how to track the local wildlife, noting footprints and subtle disturbances in the soil. Together, they repaired and reinforced the homestead, sharing tasks in a way that felt both practical and comforting. At night, they would sit by the fire, sharing stories. Daniel spoke of his childhood on Earth and the dreams that had driven him to settle on a frontier planet. He told Mika about his family, his daughter Lila, and the losses he had endured in his own way. Mika, in turn, recounted memories of her husband, the Apache traditions she sought to preserve, and the dangers she had faced during the raids. Her words were heavy with emotion, yet she spoke with a calm dignity that impressed Daniel deeply. One evening, a loud howl echoed through the frozen air. Daniel froze, instinctively reaching for the blaster he kept by the door. Mika moved faster, grabbing a simple spear-like tool and stepping outside without hesitation. A pack of alien scavengers, known for attacking settlements in search of food, had ventured close. Their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, reflecting the firelight from the homestead. Daniel felt a surge of panic, but Mika remained steady. She positioned herself between the animals and the livestock, her stance protective. "Stay behind me," she instructed. With a combination of quick movements, tactical thinking, and her deep understanding of animal behavior, Mika managed to scare the scavengers away. Daniel watched, awed, as she moved with a confidence and skill he could barely match. When the threat was gone, he stepped forward, offering a hand. I owe you my thanks. That was incredible." Mika shook her head, her expression calm. "You survived by learning from every danger. Today you saw the importance of preparation and courage." From that night on, Daniel began to view Mika not just as a helper, but as a partner in every sense of the word. He noticed how she adapted, her Apache knowledge to the alien environment, blending tradition with innovation. She created simple windbreaks using local materials, designed traps for smaller predators, and even taught Lila how to recognize subtle signs of danger. Their bond grew quietly, built on shared work and mutual respect. Daniel admired her strength, her patience, and the way she seemed to understand the land and its dangers instinctively. Mika, in turn, began to trust him, recognizing his honesty and genuine care for his family and home. One morning, as the first heavy snow began to fall, Daniel noticed Mika standing on the ridge overlooking the homestead. She seemed lost in thought, staring at the horizon where the white landscape stretched endlessly. He approached her quietly. "You're thinking about your past," he said gently. Mika looked at him, her eyes reflective. "Yes. I wonder if I will ever find a place where I truly belong. I have survived alone for so long. It is strange to feel something different." Daniel nodded. "Sometimes belonging is not about the past. It's about the present and what we build together. You don't have to face this world alone anymore." Her gaze softened, and she allowed a small smile to form. Perhaps you are right." Life at the homestead continued, but the harsh winter tested them in ways neither had expected. A snowstorm forced them to ration food and ensure the livestock stayed warm. The wind howled around the reinforced walls of the house, and the temperature dropped to dangerous levels. Daniel relied on Mika's expertise more than ever. She showed him how to insulate the pens, create heat traps, and even construct a simple alarm system to detect approaching predators. One afternoon, as they worked to repair a damaged section, a fence, Daniel accidentally slipped on the ice, twisting his ankle. He winced in pain, realizing he could not walk properly. Mika immediately came to his side, supporting him. "You must rest. The work will wait," she insisted. Daniel tried to protest, but she gently pushed him toward the house. Inside, she cleaned the wound, applied a salve made from local herbs, and bandaged it carefully. "You cannot survive if you do not take care of yourself," she said. Daniel felt a warmth in his chest he had not expected. This was more than care. It was concern, attention, and trust. He realized that over the past weeks, he had grown to depend on her in ways that went beyond survival. As the storm raged outside, Mika sat across from him by the fire, sharing stories of resilience, of how her people had survived countless hardships, and how strength was measured not just by skill, but by heart. Daniel listened, captivated. The hours passed quickly, and when the storm finally subsided, a bond had formed that neither could ignore. Weeks later, trouble arrived in a more direct form. A band of alien raiders, notorious for attacking settlements on the outskirts, had been spotted near New Mesa. They moved fast, taking advantage of the storm to approach unnoticed. Daniel and Mika worked together to prepare. Daniel reinforced the perimeter and set traps, while Mika organized strategies, assigning positions, and creating defensive measures that combined human and Apache knowledge. When the raiders arrived under the cover of night, they were met with a defense more formidable than expected. Mika's tactical planning allowed them to counter every move the raiders made. Daniel, with his knowledge of the homestead layout, guided his family and neighbors to safety. The battle was tense, but through coordination, courage, and quick thinking, the raiders were forced to retreat. In the aftermath, Daniel stood outside, breathing heavily, and looked at Mika. "I couldn't have done this without you," he admitted. Mika shook her head, brushing snow from her hair. "We did this together. You contributed more than you think. Courage is not just about fighting, it is about standing for what you protect." That night, as the homestead settled into quiet, Daniel and Mika sat together outside, watching the stars that barely shone through the planet's atmosphere. The air was crisp and clean, filled with a sense of accomplishment and safety. Daniel felt a surge of gratitude for Mika, not because she had been at the market, not because of the strange way they had met, but because of the bond they had forged through respect, trust, and survival. "I never expected this when I went to the market," Daniel said, smiling softly. Mika looked at him, her eyes reflecting the pale starlight. "Neither did I. Life has a way of surprising those who are ready to survive it." Daniel nodded, realizing that what he had thought was a mistake, the market transaction, the misunderstanding, had led to something extraordinary. He had come seeking meat and ended up finding a companion, a teacher, and perhaps even a friend who could teach him more about resilience and humanity than he had ever learned before. Mika leaned back, her expression calm. "You have a good heart, Daniel. Do not underestimate yourself. There is strength in what you have built here." Daniel felt a quiet pride. Together, they had faced storms, predators, and raiders. Together, they had learned to trust one another. He realized that life on the frontier was never easy, but with someone like Mika by his side, survival was not only possible, it was meaningful. The weeks turned into months. The winter slowly eased and the homestead flourished. Daniel and Mika continued to work together, their bond deepening naturally through shared challenges, small victories, and quiet moments of reflection. Lila grew to admire Mika, learning not just survival skills but lessons of courage, wisdom, and respect. By the time spring arrived on New Mesa, the homestead was stronger than ever. The crops had survived, the livestock thrived, and the family had grown closer in ways Daniel had never imagined. Mika had chosen to stay, not because she was bound. To him, But because she had found a place where her skills, her wisdom, and her heart were valued, Daniel watched her one morning, standing on the ridge with the sun warming the frost on her shoulders. He realized that what had begun as a trip to buy meat had turned into a life-changing journey. In the chaos of the market, in the confusion of misunderstanding, he had found something far more valuable than food. He had found resilience, friendship,